Welcome to this breakout session on risk management for large advisors. My name is Karen Aspinall, and I'm a law firm of practice, and I am joined by a very distinguished panel. And I'm going to have each of them introduce to you individually, and I'm going to start with Carlo DeFlorio.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everybody. I'm Carlo DeFlorio. I'm ACA's Chief Service Officer. ACA has 4 services. We help our clients with regulatory compliance, cybersecurity and risk, investment performance, and environmental, social, and governance services. And we help in those areas through consulting, through technology, and through managed services. I joined ACA in 2019. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in regulation, first as the director of OC, now the Division of Exams at the SEC, and then as the Chief Risk and Strategy Officer at FINRA. And prior to that, I was in consulting for a bunch of years. I was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers in the financial services risk and regulatory practice.
Hi, I'm John Hadfield. I am the Chief Compliance Officer for Vanguard Global Advisors. I also am the head of Fund Advisor Compliance, and that's Vanguard's team that oversees the compliance for all of our U.S. funds and ETFs. I've been at Vanguard for a few years now, and before that, I was with another large financial services company. And before that, I was in law firm land, practicing investment management law, both with the firms of Allen & Overy, and at that time, Sutherland, now Evershed Sutherland.
Good afternoon. My name is Rosa Licea-Mailloux. I'm the Director of Corporate Compliance at MFS Investment Management. I've been in that role for over 2 years now, and prior to that, I was with Natixis Investment Management in both legal and compliance roles for almost 15 years.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the IAA for inviting me to participate on this panel. It's really great to be here. My name is Melissa, and I am a Vice President at JP Morgan Management, and I lead the compliance coverage for the wrap fee and managed account businesses, as well as model portfolio and multi-asset advisory solutions. I've been at JP Morgan for years, and before that, I worked at a wealth management advisor for about 8 years. I'm also a proud mom of 4 kids, and we live in
Well, great. Well, thank you for the introductions, everybody. Before I forget, I just wanted to announce the communication code for those of you who want to receive credit. The first code word is larger, LAR, larger. Okay, so obviously we have a powerhouse of panelists here, excited to have this conversation. We're hoping this will be interactive, so if there are questions, if you can submit the chat feature, we'll try and see if we can work those in. If not, we can potentially get back to people on questions if you leave your name. So this session is focused on risk management of largers, and we're focusing on that just because the risk facing larger firms and how those go about identifying, assessing, and mitigating risk can be quite complex. Large firms generally have more businesses, such as affiliated structures where you may have conflicts. You may have a global business where you're dealing with overlapping regulatory regimes that are not just in the U.S. And just, multiple business lines, can obviously just create a number of challenges in handling and managing risk. In addition, larger firms oftentimes will have many people that are involved in some aspect of risk management. And so it's from that perspective, it's very important to have a deep and understanding of the business and what those activities are. Now, foundationally, the Advisors Act, we've all lived with the compliance program rule 20647, 38A1 for those of you who also funds. However, the compliance program rule ultimately requires legal and compliance professionals programs to prevent violation of the Advisors Act or the federal securities laws. However, good risk management practices go on just regulatory risk, which is what those rules are designed to capture. So being that good risk management component of an effective compliance program, Carla, I just wanted to start with you and ask you could discuss some of the principles that firms should be thinking about when developing and implementing a comprehensive risk management program.
Thanks, Karen. And that's right. Risk is broader than obviously compliance and regulatory risk. Typically, folks think about it in terms of 5 key categories of risk: strategic risk, market risk, credit risk, operational risk, and then compliance risk. And after the risk management challenges and failures of the financial crisis, regulators became very focused on risk management. And we began meeting with the boards, senior management teams, head of business units, and the leaders of compliance, risk management, and other key control functions to have a more in-depth dialogue around how risk was being taken and managed in the organization. And the lessons learned, through participating in those dialogues over the past decade, really is that it helps to have some basic common principles that anchor a firm's risk management program. And Rosa, John, and Melissa will share and illustrate that in different ways. And, I would distill it down to, in terms of just basic common principles, is first, it's helpful to have a clearly defined risk management framework. Some firms have a 3 lines of defense model because they're affiliated with a bank. Others use their own tailored models. There are frameworks out there like the CCO Enterprise Risk Management Framework. They're all fine. It doesn't really matter which one a firm is pursuing. The key is to really have agreement across the firm in what the framework is and how it clarifies roles and responsibilities between the business, between compliance and risk management and other key control functions, and between the audit and assurance function, as well as the role of senior management and the board or related committees. So for example, a framework could clarify that the business is responsible for taking and managing risk, and as the first line of defense, for example. And they do that in accordance with some clear parameters that are set by senior management and by compliance and risk in terms of standards. It could also clarify that compliance and control functions set some basic standards for the business to apply. They help communicate and train on those standards, and provide some independent challenge as well as monitoring and testing around those standards. And then the framework could also clarify that internal audit, or there may be external audit programs, but that they provide assurance that the overall framework is in place and that it's operating effectively. So that framework is a first kind of core principle. Second, it's helpful to have a common risk management taxonomy and language that is clearly understood across the firm and is used by the business, by risk management, compliance, and audit, so the firm can speak a common language and compare apples to apples as they're talking about risks across the firm. Third, it's very helpful to have a common risk assessment process and rating scale so that all 3 lines of defense are aligned on what are the key risks and what are the key exposures. And Rosa is going to talk in more detail about that. And then finally, an effective risk management framework also includes effective processes for risk monitoring, reporting, and ultimately, when there are issues, remediation. So I would share those perspectives. I'll end with the piece of information around the CCO Enterprise Risk Management Framework, which has set a standard around enterprise risk management. Last year in 2020, it published some guidance on, in particular, the role of compliance risk management in an integrated enterprise risk management framework. So to the extent that that's helpful for folks, that might be a useful reference point.
And so just integration of, risk management and compliance. Are there any, sort of, best practices there, or some observations maybe around challenges or other things that you all have seen in terms of how firms, may integrate the two?
Thanks, Karen. And, I'd start by saying that compliance and risk management are really key partners in helping a large firm effectively and efficiently assess and manage risks across the organization. So that partnership is really critical. When regulators meet with larger firms, they don't just want to meet with the board and senior management, the businesses, they really want to meet with the heads of compliance and the heads of risk and other key functions to gauge how comfortable and how well those leaders feel about their independence, their standing, their authority, their resources, important things like that. Risk typically defers to compliance with regard to legal, regulatory, code of conduct type risks. And that's why it's so important that there's a common language and framework and process and rating scale, because they're then going to take that analysis, usually from the compliance team, and incorporate it into the overall enterprise risk assessment, which then would go up to senior management and to the board. The second observation I would offer is that compliance is most closely aligned with operational risk of those 5 risk disciplines that I mentioned at the outset. And so you see a lot of firms either relying on the same teams to manage both, or really looking to closely coordinate between the compliance team and the operational risk team, because there's really a lot of overlap there. For example, cybersecurity and privacy, third-party risk management, and business continuity planning, and conflicts of interest and material non-public information all fall within that realm of operational and compliance risks. And then third, compliance also plays a really important role around some key financial related risks. And so coordination with other functions and the business on that front are critical as well. And we've seen that in the area of performance and valuation, fees and expenses, and then more recently around how a firm is factoring ESG considerations into their investment decision-making process and reporting out around that.
Excellent. Those are all, I think those are all really great points. And to the point, or one of the points that you mentioned, a lot of people, can be involved at a firm in risk management activities. And as we know, there isn't, of course, a one size fits all, just like a compliance program. People think about risk and who's involved. Melissa, at your firm, who plays a role in terms of the risk management process, and how do they all together in identifying and seeking to assess and identify and assess and of course mitigate risk?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. I think the general principle and what I usually emphasize during my compliance trainings is that compliance and risk management is every single person's responsibility. It doesn't matter what department or role you're in, every employee has to be able to identify, escalate, and manage compliance and risk. Now, that being said, most large firms, we have a robust risk management framework in place, utilizing the 3 lines of defense that Carlo just explained. And I'll just briefly run through them. I know Carlo just ran through them as well, so I'll just touch on it briefly for those who may be less familiar. The first line of the business, and they're responsible for identifying risks and designing and executing controls to mitigate those risks. And while every business has a part to play in risk management, we do have a dedicated business team who are responsible for control management functions, such as risk and control assessments, and who leads certain governance forums. The second line of defense is independent risk and compliance, so us, responsible for developing and monitoring the risk governance framework, including advising, measuring, monitoring, testing, and reporting. And the third line of defense is independent audit, which is responsible for independent testing and evaluation of the processes and controls. Now, within and as Karen alluded to in her question, working together is to executing any management program. And while we each have our own part to play within the three lines of defense framework, we need to collaborate and partner together to effectively implement and execute the risk management program. And we have a formal structure in place to promote collaboration through governance forums where members from each line of defense are in attendance to review escalated items, as well as through formal frameworks for specific processes, such as new business initiatives, risk assessment, and regulatory change. And in preparing the panel, we thought it would be a good idea to run through an example. So I'll just briefly touch upon our framework for monitoring regulatory change and the process for assessing and implementing new rules and regulations. So the control management team, which I had mentioned before and is part of the first line of defense, has developed a legal and regulatory change management framework where new or amended rules are reviewed by legal and inputted into a tool for consideration by each business. The business control management team then works with their business partners as well as compliance to assess and evaluate the applicability of each legal obligation. And if it's applicable, and depending on the size of the project, a business project manager is assigned to lead working groups to implement the legal obligation. And the working groups include all of the functional partners, including compliance. So this process is an example of the first line of defense owning the review and implementation of new rules, but of course they collaborate with the second line and even the third line of defense in certain cases throughout the assessment and implementation. And in addition to this process, compliance conducts an independent review of regulatory developments. As we all know, it's important for compliance to keep their fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the reg space. So separately, compliance receives an aggregated data report from a third-party provider, which includes new rules and regs, but also includes other information such as guidance updates and risk alerts and enforcement actions. And then depending on the topic and applicability of the item, compliance may conduct their gap analysis or risk assessment. And then to bring it all home, all of these work streams feed into forums that meet regularly with stakeholders in attendance from all three lines of defense to discuss the relevant regulatory change events and the work performed by the control management team, the business project managers, compliance, and others. So hopefully this example brings to life the risk management framework and how different roles and departments collaborate together in order to effectively manage risk and compliance.
That's great, Melissa. Thank you. I think the example is a super helpful, way to kind of bring it all together in terms of how, people at your firm collaborate. As lawyers, I think as compliance rules, in terms of understanding the rules, we often know what we can't do or what the business cannot do. But oftentimes in managing and considering risk, right, risks and judgments can be not so black and white. And so, John, question for you, at your firm, do you all have an understanding of what is the firm's risk appetite, right? When you have a firm, you have a lot of different people making risk decisions. And how does the organization kind of in people what is an acceptable level of risk versus what might be a little more than what the organization might do undertake?
Yeah, at Vanguard, our collaborative culture really impacts the way we think about risk appetite. And I'll give maybe two examples, maybe a micro and a macro. On a micro level for regulatory risk, compliance leads that assessment of risk. And we work closely with the business, closely with risk to determine the risk appetite here. I'm putting that in quotes. But in most cases, the business holds the D or the decision making in that risk, and compliance and risk are advise on those. Now, compliance for the risks, for the regulatory risk, we have great clients who are mature in this space and who understand and who listen to compliance in this regulatory space. Now, obviously, there are often prioritization of different risks, of regulatory risks when we get there, and a good client will ask a lot of good questions along the way. So we appreciate that back and forth and that collaboration for regulatory risk. And once we make that determination with that collaboration, we'll hand it off to our risk partners then to put into their what I'm calling a taxonomy. That's my word, and to put it in their broader assessment for enterprise or particular area of risk. So that's sort of a micro view. On a macro standpoint, the risk really leads the risk appetite for these assessments of risks, and along the same lines of the categories that Carlo pointed out earlier, so that are not day-to-day compliance or regulatory matters. And similarly, their risk will lead with the business and compliance following to shape their assessment. And it's really a collaborative effort. So it's both a quantitative, Carlo, as you had mentioned, sort of trying to compare apples to apples across different lines, and qualitative as well. A trader or a PM or an analyst's view are taken into account, as well as compliance, what we're seeing, right, our judgment. And so it's an effective way for us to digest risk, and that's how really we think about risk appetite with those 3 lines of defense, or at least 2 lines.
Right. That's great. So I think at this point we've kind of covered some of the foundational principles, just more broadly around, principles that kind of can be used in constructing who generally is involved, and how important it is to be collaborative and working together on the program. I want to turn a little bit to get into some more of the substance of the actual programs themselves. And of course, one extremely important aspect of that Carlo had mentioned earlier is the risk assessment process, right? And try and mitigate risk unless we understand where the risks lie. Rosa, what are some of the best practices that you find to be important when going through the risk assessment process?
Sure, and so some of what I'm going to say is going to echo what my fellow panelists are mentioning, which is
I'm having trouble hearing you. Is anyone else?
Sorry, is this better?
That's better, yeah.
That's better? Okay.
There
so I
you
was
go.
saying,
Perfect.
thank you. I'm going to echo a little bit of what my fellow panelists are saying, which is that, the collaboration and the partnership piece of it. Also, there is a key to this, I think, and it is the process aspect of it, right? And so we are lucky enough at MFS that we partner with our enterprise risk management team. And so that partnership is, we know that they lead that effort cross compliance, right? Or across the organization to identify all of the risks that apply to the organization. The compliance team is a partner with them in the sense that they share that information with us. And then what that allows us to do is to take that information in from a compliance perspective and then do our own compliance-based risk assessment, right? And so what we do then is we intake all of that information, which is extensive because our enterprise risk management team does a wonderful job. But when we take it in, then we cut it down into different compliance risks, right? Because there's the broad taxonomy that happens at an organization, but then there is the compliance specific taxonomy. And so we happen to have 21 risks that we've identified over time. The additional piece in this, I'm sure, especially other large investment advisors will take this into account, is it isn't just a matter of applying those 21 risks from a US perspective. In addition to that, obviously, we need to make sure that we're keeping in mind any other jurisdictions that come into play, because the risk may be of a certain nature in the United States, but a different regulator may consider that a higher risk item. So as much as we rely on the work that our enterprise risk management team does, there is an additional review and independent process of assessment to categorize those risks. We do it from a US perspective within my team, and then the rest of the organization's compliance officers from a jurisdictional perspective will also chime in. And of course, all of you, I'm sure, who are listening are aware of a part of it is the inherent risk process, and then it's the mitigated risk process. And this is an annual process, right? It never ends. You finish and then you start again. And so at the end of the day, I think part of it is making sure that we do that appropriately on an annual basis. But in addition to that, it's then coming back to the organization with information, because part of our job, I believe, is to keep the organization aware of risks, not just understanding the risk appetite of the organization, but also making sure that we are advising, we are monitoring, and we are educating the organization with risk awareness in mind. So hopefully that helps answer some of these questions.
That's excellent. Thank you. Carlo, given your unique perspective, being a former regulator and also having served in many capacities where you've had opportunity to work with multiple firms, do you have any other maybe best practices that others can learn from?
I would just, I thought Rosa said it really well there, and just reiterate her point. Like, the collaboration is so important, and having a common language and a common process around risk assessment and some common rating scales can really help facilitate that process. I think the other thing I've observed, both as a regulator and as a consultant, is what really helps that process is, the credibility that Rosa, John, and Melissa bring in their organizations to that exercise, and their deep knowledge of the business and the products and the services and the strategies help the business appreciate that they really are thinking about the business and the challenges the business is facing, helps with credibility, and then helps really get to the right risks and the right solutions around those risks. And that's allocating precious resources in the organization. So that risk assessment process that Rosa talked through is really important, both to manage risk, but also to just efficiently manage resources.
Terrific. And Melissa mentioned it earlier, just, regarding risk management being everyone's responsibility firm. But, what makes, I think, legal and compliance professionals really effective in their role is really understanding the business very well, and really having those partnerships that you can lean on your business partners if they're, embarking on a new practice or one that you may not, seen before, and have the ability to really ask questions and work collaboratively with them on understanding risks. John, with the complexity that, a large organization will often bring to the table, how do you feel your relationships with the business has facilitated your, being able to be more effective in kind of identifying and managing risks to the firm?
Yeah, great question, Karen. And I would just say client relationships are critical. And I suspect, I see some head nods here on the panel, and I suspect out there, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but for me, what stands out here are two items. Really, you said, but know your business and knowing your clients. And those are two key things here to be able to identify, assess, and mitigate risk. And maybe 4 takeaways for know your clients. I'm just going to click off a few, and then I'm going to go back and touch on them. One would have a regular touch points with your clients, with your major clients. 2, let them know your priority items. 3, give them timely informs on hot topics. And the last one is listen. This one's a tough for me. And listen, I guess, which is tough for me. And on the regular touch points piece, you're gonna, as you build that relationship, you're gonna understand. Clients are gonna share with you. And there was just an instance just a few weeks ago that a client of mine shared an area of unease that they had that I had completely overlooked. My staff and I had completely overlooked, and so we're busy looking at that right now. But it came from that regular touch point. Under let them know your priority items. As soon as I had mentioned a few priority items, this is early on in COVID-19, a few things that we were looking at, the business jumped right on them, and they were appreciative that we let them know same thing, inspections and governance. When we had let them know, they were right on top of it. They wanted to know how they can help because they want to. And on timely informs on hot topics, I'll just say that I know my staff and I are busy working up a draft on the inspections alert that just came out today on the priorities. So we're already on that and hoping to get out something on hot topics that'll produce some conversation. And then on the listening part, it's really listen, understand what's going on, understand what's coming, even from an HR standpoint. Are they moving teams around? If they're moving teams around, how might that impact policies, et cetera, procedures? And then on the know your business area, I just say 2 quick takeaways: ask questions and take some courses. So it's okay to not know everything. We're not going to know everything. I know that it's sometimes uncomfortable to admit to a head PM, you may not know about her business in a particular area. It's okay to ask. They want to tell you. Take some courses, whether it's internal courses or this is a big firm, so panel, so I suspect many of our firms offer learning courses. The IAA offers great courses. Things like Khan Academy as well, just out there on the net, and just keep learning. Those are going to help really identify, assess, and mitigate those risks.
Those are excellent, Jens. Melissa, what about at your firm? Anything else to add?
Thanks. All excellent point, John. I think maybe I'll just add on top of it a couple of thoughts and some best practices that I've learned over the years. And the first one is to take your point around knowing the business and having a really good understanding of the business. I think that's key. And I think we've all heard the cliches, you don't know what you don't know, or the devil's in the details. But the reality is we make better decisions with more information. So it's hard to be effective in any compliance role, whether it's advising or monitoring, testing, risk assessment, if we don't have a good understanding of the business and its processes. So fully echo, what John had just said. I guess tip number 2 would be, an attitude of partnership. For me, it isn't, business versus compliance or an us versus them mentality, but that we're all working towards a goal, and it should be clear to the business, right? That we're all working towards a goal of creating and providing amazing products and solutions for our clients. And we all need to partner together to ensure that we're doing it in the right way. So level setting from that perspective. And then, going into tip number 3, again, to echo what John was saying about, having regular touch points with the business. I like to say that business and compliance should be on each other's speed dials, right? Having open, honest, and regular conversations and dialogues, right? Where both of us are speaking and both of us are listening. With business stakeholders is key to any risk management program. And I know I want my business partners to know that I'm available if they have a question or just want to run through an idea. And it's through these conversations that we're able to shape the outcome together. And then I guess my last point on relationships with the business is making sure that we have a seat at the table. So saying it in a different way, be a part of the business projects from the get-go. I always tell my business partners and stakeholders that I'd rather work together with them on creating the solution instead of the business developing a plan on their own and then having, the bottleneck of needing to stop and review it by compliance, which can create a lot of tension. I'm sure we've all been there. So instead, being included in the conversations and the business planning up front, I think saves a lot of headache later on and is critical for, building those business relationships and the overall risk management process.
Great points, Melissa. and I have seen that happen as well. It's just a terrible feeling when the business is so hard on something to develop a new whatever it is, and then it falls on your desk on, pretty much, they're ready to go, and then all of a sudden you're in the untenable position of having to raise, a bunch of issues that, perhaps if you had been brought in sooner, these challenges could have easily been avoided. So having to use your words, having each other on speed dial, is just so important. I feel you're going to be collaborative and helpful. I think that they're more likely to give you that ring and give you the heads up, and similarly view it as a partnership. So we've talked about, and I think we all agree on this importance of collaboration, and kind of talked a little bit about, risk appetite. Think about it, inevitably, when you're dealing with risk, and when you're not areas that are prohibited, you're going to be in a gray. You're in the gray, right? It's a gray area, and people aren't always going to agree whether or not a risk is acceptable, and whether or not, a particular mitigation tactic might be one that they would like to, or not. And so sometimes there can be very valid disagreements around, appropriate levels of risk, whether or not people are, and I'm sure everyone has heard it, been too conservative. So Rosa, I wanted a few points on just, whether or not you have had any of those sorts of challenges, and how do you reconcile kind of different views on, risk taking and levels of risk?
Yeah, so
and
I
the
think all of us.
disagreements that may come with it. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And I think you can hear me okay this time, right? So I think all of us on this panel, and probably every single person who's listening in, has dealt with this as an issue, right? And I think I'm going to say not all, but a lot of compliance and legal professionals like the black and white, right? I think we would all like that, and to deal with less gray would be wonderful, but we actually live in gray. I think that's the reality of our profession. And so getting back a little bit to what I said before about risk awareness, right? I want to make sure that I'm making it clear to the business, this is the risk that you're undertaking if you go down that path. I think it is very clear in cases where it's illegal that it's not going to happen, right? That's not a risk appetite issue, right? But I think the risk awareness piece is there. I think the collaboration is important, and we've been talking about having a seat at the table, right? We've been talking about making sure we're in front of each other and we listen to each other. But I think the reason that you need a seat at the table and you need that conversation is because at the end of the day, we need to build a level of trust with each other. It doesn't mean that compliance isn't the second line. If we're talking about first, second, and third lines of defense, we are still the second line. That is what we are. But we need to make sure that we are present and listening so that we understand what that relationship means and that true partnership means. It means that and I think it was Melissa who said, compliance is everybody's job. Really explaining to the different business units why compliance is everybody's job, because we need you. We need you to raise your hand. We need you to contact us. We need you to keep us in mind so that we don't have to come in sweeping in last minute to stop something from happening, right? And so if we have those relationships and we build those, and we build a level of trust that hopefully results in, even if we have a seat at the table, even if we're in all those committee meetings, even if we're getting reports, we still have people who have a level of confidence and trust in us that they are picking up the phone, right? And they're giving us a call so that we are brought in. So and I usually say this, if it's illegal, it's not happening, right? If there is a gray area, let's talk about the gray. Let's figure out, maybe it's something that I personally would not be comfortable with from a risk perspective, but if the organization or the department is comfortable with that, then let's have a conversation of how we're going to mitigate that risk. What monitoring, what controls, what testing, what additional policies and procedures may need to be adopted to deal with that risk, and how are we going to evaluate that risk over time. And so I think, I've said quite a mouthful, but I really do think it all really does come back to that level of trust that you have to build. And I think a lot of that is also admitting to the departments that we partner with that they're in the weeds. They understand a lot of the operational things that we do not, right? Because we can't be there all the time. So we need to have those relationships and open conversations.
Yeah, I think those are all on point. I wanted to pivot at this point and talk a little bit about a topic that I think many people will be interested in, and that is the topic of CCO liability. And we're talking about personal liability. There was a speech by Commissioner Peirce towards the end of last year where she kind of brought this topic again to the forefront. There's been some enforcement actions in this space. Signed it to some of them in the program materials if you wanted to look at those more closely. But there isn't there right now a framework or a particular standards that a CCO will be held to. And we've seen in certain cases where CCOs have been held responsible for really not having an effective compliance program in place, which is obviously very concerning to the dutiful and well-intentioned compliance officer. This was also highlighted in a New York City bar report, kind of making a lot of similar points about we need to be more clear for those in this profession, so that everyone can have a clear understanding of how they will be judged. Obviously, we're not talking about the intentional misconduct or those bad actors that are doing things that we know people shouldn't be doing, but really we are talking about those that aren't in their responsibilities, but perhaps there was some kind of oversight or what have you. I guess, Carla, I wanted to talk to you about this in particular. Obviously, with your former pad and just kind of more broadly, this is definitely a concerning area. I applaud Commissioner Peirce for noting that this is a topic that she is taking up, and she had expressed an intention that she would be drafting standards for the other commissioners, at least for review. We don't know obviously if that's something that will ever make it public, but it is an important topic and one that I think compliance officers need to be mindful of. So just your thoughts on the subject and kind of how compliance professionals are thinking about this.
Yeah, you're right, Karen. It's such an important topic. If we take away one thing from this panel,
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Is anyone else having trouble, or is it just me? Can you speak up a little, maybe, or get closer to the mic?
Can you hear me okay now? Is that better?
It's a little better.
Okay, great. I'll shout in. So I was saying that I think you raise a great point. It's such an important topic. If you take away something from the panel discussion today, with the examples that Rosa and John and Melissa and you touched on, Karen, it's that, it's really hard being a chief compliance officer, right? And things aren't all black and white. They are gray, as Rosa said. So this is an area where there's a lot of passion, a lot of concern, and a lot of interest in getting some clarity. It's interesting to sort of step back. I think that the IAA, the NSCP, and other organizations have really been helpful for the compliance community in raising these concerns with regulators like the SEC and FINRA and other regulators around CCO liability. In 2013, Chair White made a speech at the annual NSCP conference in which he said compliance officers should not fear enforcement action if they perform their responsibilities diligently, in good faith, and in compliance with the law. And that was a pretty broad statement. 2 years later, her enforcement director, Andrew Seresny at the time, came to the annual meeting of the NSCP and delivered another really important speech on CCO liability, in which he outlined 3 specific scenarios, so a bit more specificity. And the first is, they're going to bring cases against CCOs who are affirmatively involved in the misconduct. To your point, Karen, nobody really has an issue with that, right? It's egregious. The second is they're going to bring cases against CCOs who engage in efforts to obstruct or mislead the SEC's staff. Again, no one really has a problem with that, pretty straightforward. But the third area where he said they're going to bring cases is where the CCO has exhibited a wholesale failure to carry out his or her responsibilities. And it's here, this lack of clarity on what is a wholesale failure, what does it mean, the inherent hindsight bias that arises when regulators are looking at facts after they've arisen, and this implied negligence standard around this category of cases that has raised a lot of concerns in the compliance community among industry associations, and really gave rise, as you noted, Karen, to a 2020 report by the New York City Bar Association that looked at this issue in further depth. I think what's really interesting about Commissioner Peirce's stepping in and giving her speech at the NSCP annual meeting is she really invited the compliance community to engage with her and help her put some clarity and some parameters and some standard around CCO liability. And I know that the NSCP and IAA and other industry associations are certainly going to engage and be helpful in that regard. There was an interesting podcast interview you can see on NSCP's website with her just recently. And she said some interesting things. She shared that, if you have a liability regime that doesn't work, you're going to scare good people from taking these really important jobs. And we want really good people in these really important jobs, right? So we don't want to create a scenario where people are moving away from the compliance profession. We want to bring a scenario where good people are coming to the compliance profession. She also indicated that she wants to put in place some ground rules to help ensure that regulators don't inadvertently punish compliance officers who are focused on doing the right thing, but were unsuccessful in preventing certain compliance failures in their firm. And it could have been because they weren't aware of them. It could have been because they weren't listened to. It could have been as a result of resources. There's a number of potential reasons why the violation may have occurred. But again, if compliance officers are trying to do the right thing, you want a framework in place that protects them, not hurts them in those situations. And so I think it's a really great opportunity to inform and share perspective with Commissioner Peirce. She's going to work hard inside the SEC to facilitate dialogue and explore opportunities to define a clearer standard and put some more clear guidance out there around CCO liability, so the good folks who are doing this important work every day have a bit more clarity and protection.
I think that would be terrific. And as you all may be aware, Commissioner Peirce is going to be speaking at this conference, so we'll definitely be waiting and listening to see if she provides maybe any more detail on this initiative. So that would be great. But yeah, to your point, Carlo, about resourcing, and you noted on the slide here, we're going to have a new SEC chair coming in. I mean, we could have a potential change in the posture, which we've seen in previous, when there's been previous changes, so going from Mary to Chair Clayton, and so we'll definitely have to see what what that looks like. We have our new chair in place, but going back to the point of just resources, and in definitely difficult times and challenging times, and compliance seems to be an area where people are trying to do more with less. Sometimes budgets can really come under pressure for various reasons, and so just wanted to you, John, and see what you're seeing on this front. There's obviously just a lot of regulatory change that wedging, just generally speaking. And then, again, we have this new SEC chair that's coming in who historically, been pretty aggressive in pursuing his agenda. Obviously for Gensler's in the context of Dodd-Frank, but, that's the history we have to kind of look at. How do you ensure that your compliance program has the resources that it needs, and how have you evolved thinking, in terms of, is it technology or other ways to maybe become efficient, than just, kind of adding headcount or spending more dollars on perhaps consultants?
Yeah, really timely question, and I would say we've been diligent in constant reassessment, meaning constant reassessment of our resource needs on a monthly basis. So discussing what rules are coming down the line, what hot topics are we seeing among the business, and what risks are arising. So, and allocating resources accordingly. That monthly assessment has been helpful, and it continues to be. I would say another one is we pulse the team. Pulse your teams to see what they're seeing out there, especially staff who you may not come in contact with day to day. There's great utility in that and understanding what's happening out there. Another one is looking for efficiencies. And Karen, you had mentioned this, and whether it's tech, I'm challenging myself on is to look into comply tech, right? Understanding that more, how we can bring that. We have a great example of one of the groups on my team just implemented a fantastic and innovative application that's driving significant efficiency, taking manual processes out and making them automated. Sounds easy, but it was a difficult lift for this team. They came through, and it's those types of things, looking for efficiencies. How do we take out those? Somebody on the panel, I think maybe Carlo had said the operational nature of it, taking out those manual operating, those opportunities for manual error, and really streamlining it. So we're learning more. We're learning a lot more on that, and eager to continue to do that. Another one is flexing teams. So one portion of our team may be running hot at one moment, looking to others that might have a little bit more time or things they can put off to the side that aren't fires right now, and they can pitch in. And we're really getting to just at the beginning of that, but that's what we're trying to do is be more flexible in that. And the last one I'd say is when you've exhausted those areas, you continue to press on all of those, continue to advocate your leadership for other resources. It could be again, flexing from other teams or from around other compliance teams or whatnot. But those are big ones that we've been trying to focus on so far, Karen. Interested in the group. Yeah, hear if there's any others from the group, any other items from the group that people are thinking on how you've looked at resources.
And so do you have, go ahead, please, Rosa.
No, I was just going to say, I would add, so everything that you said is completely spot on. So it's RPA or robotics. How can you automate some of the stuff that can be automated, right? But it's being clear with people that it's a short-term pain for the long-term gain in that process, because you are putting a lot more work on the same people that you're trying to help in the long run, right? And so it's being able to almost market to your own people that this is worth it, right? And really kind of highlighting the wins that you have in that area. And then I think the other piece, and somebody had touched about constant education, right? But it's changing the mindset of folks, right? Because when you have technology come in, sometimes people start to worry that they're going to lose their jobs if technology takes over. And it's really not that. It's, you know what, let's change your mindset, because you're still going to have tons of things to review. The technology is going to just identify the high level items. And so let's re-educate your brain to look into that depth, right? But at the end of the day, it's a people business, all of it, even the compliance aspect of it is. So just making sure that we are looking at all of that, not overburdening our people, but then when necessary, having those hard conversations with senior management and saying, I've squeezed enough juice out of this. I need staff.
Thanks,
Exactly.
Rosa.
Yeah,
That's really helpful. Yeah.
yeah, and those are the conversations, especially, at least in my experience with larger firms, you go through a budgeting process. And then, so as part of that, you generally know, the rules that have been finalized is oftentimes that you think are going to come out based on, the regulatory agenda of the regulator. But once it comes out, it's really then you have to then go through that assessment process, and that oftentimes can take a while. You need additional dollars even just for the assessment. And I was going to just ask you, Carlo, I guess, are you seeing any other technological solutions perhaps out there that people may be using, or ways to kind of think about, technology and efficiencies for purposes of it and the ever shrinking compliance budget?
Yeah, we certainly are. It's I think the great thing for compliance officers and functions today, and for organizations that are looking to manage budgets, particularly CCOs, are being asked to do better with less, right? Maybe their budgets are flat, but the requirements are increasing, geographies are increasing, products, services, asset class, business is increasing. So there's really more with less. And there's just a really exciting evolution of the technology that we certainly see our clients very much engaged around employee compliance and code of conduct management and the automation around that. Trade, surveillance, really I'd call it holistic surveillance today. You have people doing, trade surveillance, individual employee trading surveillance. You've got, e-com surveillance, social media surveillance, telephony surveillance. All of those take a lot of time and energy from the compliance program. And today there are really good opportunities to integrate those, deploy those much more effectively, much more efficiently. And it can take, for example, 500 alerts, take away the noise and bring it down to 51 alerts. 51 alerts, a compliance member on the team can dig into. 500 alerts is going to overwhelm them, right? And today the technology can, take the signal from the noise and bring it right down with precision to the more important alerts. So I think that holistic surveillance is probably the area that's going to develop the most. We certainly see that interest among our clients. But really, you just take the compliance program and look at all the core processes. And to Rosa's point, all of that is potentially automated today. And it doesn't mean taking a lot away from compliance. It means freeing up their time to be strategic, exercise judgment, tough calls, and really add the most value.
Right. All excellent. I just wanted to announce the second continuing education code, larger, and the letter B, all one word, larger, capital letter B for boy. I think this brings us right to the end of our time. I just want to ask any of our esteemed panelists, anyone having else that they'd like to share with the audience. If not, I think this was a really insightful discussion. I've learned a lot from all of you guys and your experience, and I everyone in the audience has as well. So thank you guys very much.